In a dark alley, I was bitten by a vampire, the pain so excruciating that I could barely stand. Just when I thought I was going to die, my wolf instincts kicked in, and I decided to fight back with everything I had. Chapter 7. I opened my mouth to howl as the agonizing pain shot through my body, but no sound came out. I felt the vampire's hands release my shoulders as I slowly sank to the ground, blindly clutching the wound as my eyes strained with tears of pain. Dimly I could hear the vampires conversing about something, but all I could focus on was the burning sensation spreading throughout my body. Was I dying? Was a vampire bite fatal to a werewolf? My blood was screaming in my veins and my wolf was howling in fury in the back of my mind, urging me to get up, to fight it. She wanted me to shift, but the pain of the bite and the sensation of the venom in my veins distracted me and distanced me from her. I wasn't sure I would be able to shift at all. Maybe that was one of the side effects of vampire poison. My stomach plummeted as I realized that if I couldn't shift, I couldn't contact my friends, and there was no way I could focus enough through all of this pain to contact my family members from this distance. It was the worst pain I'd felt in my life, unlike anything I'd felt before, worse even than the touch of silver to my skin. I drew back my lips to expose my elongated canines, snarling my fury as I focused on the two vampires in the alley. One of them was gesturing at me as they discussed something. I tried to struggle to my feet, but immediately collapsed back down, breathing hard and clutching my neck as if that would help. At least the vampire venom didn't cause immediate paralysis, although part of me was certain I was going to faint from the pain at any moment. My wolf urged me to retaliate before they could do anything else to me. I tried to suppress a deep whine of pain, knowing they would only get satisfaction out of that. I took a deep, shuddering breath as I tried to control the pain. I gritted my teeth as the wound burned. I could feel blood trickling down the side of my neck. How dare those creatures bite me? How dare they attack me from behind? Caught up in my furious thoughts, I drew all of my energy together as I focused on the vampire that had bitten me. I let my anger flood into my mind. It dominated all other coherent thoughts as my fury suffused me with heat. My eyes were watery with the pain, but I made every effort to suppress it, honing in on one target. I wasn't going to just sit here and let them kill me. Attempting to ignore the searing agony, I crouched for a split second, angled myself at the vampire, then lunged. My body uncoiled and flew through the air at a werewolf speed. The vampire turned, eyes widening, and tried to dodge my attack but was not quick enough. My body hit his at full force and he flew backwards 20 feet, landing on his back with me on top of him. I snarled, eyes still tearing up with the pain of the bite, and prepared to sink my teeth into his pale throat. Then I sensed light movement from behind me. I was being picked up by the neck and thrown backwards. Twisting in the air, I angled my position so I rolled as I hit the ground, quickly climbing to my feet to see the first vampire directly in front of me. I mentally cursed as I wobbled slightly. I had to get these damn heels off of my feet. The vampire was snarling as he drew his fist back and aimed a fast punch at my face, but not fast enough. With lightning speed, working on sheer instinct and adrenaline, I spun away from the blow, then swung a roundhouse kick at his head with every ounce of force I had left. The vampire was either slower than I or not expecting my speed and ferocity. The blow struck him in the side of the head and he flew backwards, his body and head hitting the wall on the side of the alleyway with a loud crack. He slowly slid down the wall, looking dazed. I was slightly off kilter from the roundhouse kick due to the fact that I was still wearing these stupid shoes, and did not have time to regain my balance before the other vampire was on me, his body colliding with mine as he tackled me against the opposite wall. My back struck the wall and I groaned with pain. The pain from the bite itself had lessened slightly to a nearly bearable level. By the look on the vampire's face, just inches from my own, he knew the pain was abating and planned on biting me again. He snarled grotesquely, lips peeling back to reveal his pointed canines as he pinned me to the wall. His entire body was pressed against mine, and I shuddered with revulsion at his cold touch. "You werewolf bitch," he breathed. His breath smelled like a rotting corpse, and I winced. His teeth were dangerously close to my face and I knew he was about to strike. I began to thrash left and right as I attempted to break his grip. although his hands were strong as they grabbed my arms, and although he had me pinned tightly, I felt him shift slightly as I continued my struggle. With that small change in pressure, I instinctively knew that in terms of brute strength, I was stronger. With one more swift jerk, I freed one of my legs and threw my knee upwards in the same instant. I felt my blow hit its target between the vampire's legs and he released me, hissing in pain. I resisted the urge to smirk. Apparently there was one consistent weak spot for males of all species. I took advantage of his distraction by reaching forward and grabbing a handful of his shirt. Then, utilizing every bit of my returning werewolf strength, I threw the vampire towards the far end of the alleyway where there was just a dead end, a solid brick wall. I heard a dull thud as he struck the target. I could feel the distance between my wolf and I rapidly shrinking. The bite's venom was wearing off. She commanded in my mind as I felt her consciousness reaching out towards mine. Narrowing my eyes, I tried to fight off the last waves of pain so I could merge my consciousness with my wolf's. Unfortunately, it was as if there was a thin mental barrier hovering between our minds. Try as I might, I could not shatter it with my mental force. I was prevented from shifting entirely, only having my canines and claws, until the venom was out of my system completely. Crawling lowly at this realization, I bent down and buckled each shoe as quickly as I could, lamenting the fact that I hadn't worn my more basic slip, on heels, dropping them next to me against the wall of the alleyway. The last thing I needed was to break an ankle. Barefoot, I approached the vampire I had just thrown. He was slumped at an awkward angle in the shadows at the bottom of the wall, and I had no doubt that I'd broken something when I threw him. Still, something told me he would heal fast enough, and I needed to kill him before he could. Once again, I didn't get a chance to strike. I felt a rush of air and heard a low snarl behind me that signified the return of the first vampire. Apparently they healed pretty rapidly, as I definitely had something crack when I threw him against wall. I spun around quickly in time to dodge two fast punches aimed at my face and chest. I retaliated with a left hook of my own, but he dodged to the right, aiming a kick straight at my stomach. I winced as it collided with my midsection. The air was completely knocked out of my system, causing me to stumble backwards a few steps. These guys just don't give up, I snarled mentally, recovering my balance quickly before he could press the advantage. I coiled and sprung, knocking into the vampire and sending us tumbling to the ground. We rolled over and over as we each attempted to punch and kick the other. As our momentum slowed, the vampire tried to pin me to the ground with his weight on my upper half. Maneuvering the part of my body that he didn't have pinned, I managed to wedge my feet under his middle before he could trap me entirely. With one big shove and a grunt of effort, I extended my legs, throwing him off of me and into the wall nearby. In an instant, I struggled upward and leapt towards him, grabbing him while he was winded. His body had slumped off of the wall, but I grabbed his neck with one hand and slammed him right back into it. He hissed in pain. I decided to take a page out of the vampire's book, snarling. I bared my canines, yanked his head to the side, and buried my teeth into the junction between his neck and shoulder. The vampire roared in agony and fury, and I felt a primal sense of satisfaction as my wolf howled triumphantly in the back of my mind. My teeth easily broke the skin and sank deep into muscle. His blood tasted bitter and was somewhat acidic. My victory was cut short as I had to withdraw my fangs when the blood rushed into my mouth, then began to cause a burning sensation. Coughing and spluttering, I released him, spitting his life essence out on the pavement and wiping my mouth with one hand. I could smell the fresh blood pouring out of his shoulder as he snarled in pain, sinking to the ground. I mentally reminded myself not to let vampire blood touch me again, as my mouth was burning like I'd eaten a pile of your POS. The logical side of my brain kicked in then, reminding me of the other vampire on the far end of the alleyway, the one I'd kicked in the family jewels and then thrown like a rag doll. These vampires certainly weren't as physically strong as I was, although they were fast. I spun around to see him slowly clambering to his feet, bracing myself for his next move. He looked down as his comrade, the one I had bitten, then bared his teeth in fury. Once again moving surprisingly fast, he leapt towards me. I dodged neatly to the side and he spun around, throwing a fist at my face. I threw my arm up in time to block it, then countered with a punch of my own. hitting him square in the ribs. The vampire grunted in pain but recovered quickly with a move I didn't expect. He faked a left hook that I blocked, whirled to the side, then brought his leg around and kicked my leg straight out from under me. I barely recovered in time to prevent my face from connecting with the pavement, landing heavily on my side. The vampire then grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head back painfully. I snarled with the pain but as he wrenched on my hair, my eyes fell on something nearby. An unconventional weapon. But it would work. I twisted around slightly to gain leverage and elbowed the vampire as hard as I could, which caused him to slightly loosen the grip on my hair as the blow connected. I took this opportunity to abruptly reach forward, grabbing one of my shoes. My eyes watered as my scalp screamed in pain. I was pretty sure some of my hair had been pulled out with my rapid movements. All of this had happened in a mere second, and I wasted no more time. In the same motion that I grabbed my shoe, I twisted back around again, gathering every ounce of my strength, and threw my arm forward, driving the heel straight into the vampire's abdomen. Who knew if humans had ever tried this trick? I thought dimly. They may not have the strength to make the heel into such a lethal weapon. But hell, at least these pointy shoes had been good for something tonight. I thought wryly, as the vampire screeched in agony and stumbled back. I quickly leapt upward again, growling ferociously. I rushed over to him with werewolf speed and slammed him into the wall, baring my teeth. He put up a struggle, blood darkening the front of his shirt, but I gripped him tightly, my claws digging into his arms. I was considering the best way to leverage myself to break his neck when I was caught off guard for the second time in mere moments. I heard something above me a split second before a heavy weight landed directly on my back. I staggered and collapsed to my knees from the force of it. I heard a malevolent dark chuckle from the entity on my back before something sharp and cold plunged into the side of my neck. I bucked furiously, throwing the intruder off, and staggered to my feet as I tried to focus on him. He stood there, a couple inches taller than the other two but clearly another vampire. Just how many were around here? Anyways, he obviously had not bitten me. The burning pain had not returned. So what had he inserted into my neck? Without thinking, I raised one hand to my neck. I could feel a minuscule puncture wound. A sense of foreboding washed over me an instant before the dizziness hit me. I staggered yet again, suddenly exhausted. The world started to tilt on its axis and I collapsed, breathing heavily. A sense of calm was beginning to wash over me despite the dizziness. I felt as if I hadn't slept for a week. My body was beginning to shut down and my eyes drooped. My wolf urged me to get up, to keep fighting, but I was just too tired. Dimly I registered that he must have inserted some drug into my system, but there was nothing I could do about it. The last thing I heard was the two vampires arguing before I keeled over and my world went dark. It could have been mere seconds, or it could have been days, before I began to regain consciousness. I floated in the dark place between awake and asleep as I tried to comprehend what was happening. I dimly registered that my hands and feet were bound, and I was lying horizontally on a fairly uncomfortable surface. I could hear voices muddled in the background, but I did not have the presence of mind to understand them or even open my eyes. Something nagged at me something was wrong, but my mind was too tired to try to figure it out. Groaning slightly, I gave in to temptation and returned to the darkness. This happened a couple more times before I truly regained consciousness. I vaguely remembered being dragged on the ground before being propped up and tied to something. I even thought an needle had been plunged into my neck a second time, although I wasn't sure. I remembered a sharp burning pain at my wrists, and multiple instances of hushed talking. I wasn't sure what was real and what was a dream anymore. My body constantly craved the dark, dreamless sleep, and I gladly sank into it. After a while, however, the sleep became less peaceful. I began to register a dull, incessant pain and voices. The agitated voice in my mind became increasingly agitated, shouting at me to wake up. My body throbbed and ached in the darkness behind my eyelids gradually transitioned into a bright light. I truly knew I was awake when I finally opened my eyes and winced. There was a bright fluorescent bulb directly above me. I made no noise as I finally woke up. Some semblance of caution forced me to hold my tongue, squinting against the beam of light. I glanced around to take in my surroundings. I was alone in what looked like a warehouse or storage room, although it was fairly small. The room was almost completely bare except for a small table and a couple of chairs set against the corner near the only door. The door itself looked like it was pulled open from the bottom, somewhat like a garage door. As for me, I was tied to a chair in the middle of the room. I was currently alone. My wrists were burning, and I realized the pain must have brought me to consciousness. They were tied behind the chair, and as I glanced over my shoulder, I realized why they hurt so badly and I swore. To my agent extraordinaire, wildest, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The kryptonite of werewolves. Silver sapped our strength and drove a mental barrier between us and our wolves, preventing us from shifting and leaving us almost as weak as humans. It even made communication with direct family members more difficult in human form. As long as it touched me, my wounds would not heal and I would not be able to shift. Nobody knew why silver was such a weakness of ours. It had been this way since the first wolves roamed the planet, and as far as I knew, there was no way to develop a tolerance to it. We were immune to so many things that caused humans harm, yet they wore silver jewelry on a daily basis. The irony was not lost on me. My father had said it was best to understand the effects of silver as making our inner wolves ill, which isolated them from us, while the skin irritation was more of an allergic reaction. I tugged at the silver chains that bound me, wincing in pain. I wasn't going to be able to break them with my reduced strength. The chains were locked together and one of my kidnappers had the key. Trying not to panic, I attempted to contact my wolf. I could still sense her agitation and her pain, but I could not hear her voice. I could tell she felt the same frustration at the lack of contact. But for now we were stuck, feeling frighteningly alone. How was I going to get out of here? I wasn't strong enough to break free. I had no idea how long I had been here. My pack was probably having a heart attack by now. Had my friends noticed my absence at the club? Was my family searching for me? Thinking of my family gave me a moment of surprising clarity. The silver created a barrier between my wolf and I, meaning I couldn't shift and converse with the rest of the pack. However, I didn't need to be in wolf form to converse with my immediate family or the alpha. The problem was, conversing at this great of a distance from them required both strength and concentration. I'd been in too much pain and too distracted during the battle to contact them, but now it might be possible. I had no doubt that they could be trying to communicate with me, but with the silver-induced barriers in my mind, they were having no luck. If I could just lower my barriers for a few seconds to send a quick message, it would be difficult. I knew that much. I would have to conserve every last drop of energy I had. Even if I did have enough strength to break through the silver-induced haze and lower my barriers, I would only have a couple of seconds before my reduced strength gave out. It was definitely not a guaranteed plan, but it was the best I had. With a glimmer of self-deprecating amusement, I realized that this would be easier if I were mated to Gabriel. Mates had a bond so strong that the strictly external touch of silver couldn't break their mind link. It required a silver bullet or silver in the bloodstream to disrupt that connection. Thinking of Gabriel brought a fresh rush of pain and I turned my head to the side, gritting my teeth. Did he have any idea where I was? I did not have time to dwell on these thoughts, for I heard footside, fast approaching. Not knowing how to handle the situation in my unfortunate state, I pushed back the pain in my body and allowed my head to loll to the side, closing my eyes. Perhaps I could catch them off guard or learn something about them if they thought I was asleep. What had they drugged me with? To my agent extraordinaire, wildest, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Forcing my breathing to be even and relaxed, I kept up my act as I heard a loud, rusty grating sound. The door slid upwards and I heard two distinct sets of footsteps. I tried to breathe through my nose to better understand what I was up against, but all I got was a faint whiff. Once again I was struck by the subtlety of a vampire's scent. "She's still asleep," came the incredulous voice. I recognized it as the vampire that had bitten me. then later called me a werewolf bitch. I'm not surprised. I gave her enough to kill a vampire. The voice was calm, collected, coming from the vampire that had drugged me. I heard the door slide shut again, connecting with the ground with an ominous thud. Still, it's been more than 8 hours. It's nearly sunrise. I tried not to let my obvious shock show. To my agent extraordinaire, Myelin Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Surely someone was searching for me by now. My father would be going out of his mind with worry. Yes, the timing of this was most unfortunate. Antonio can't come meet us here until this evening. He was too far away to make it here before sunrise. So the vampire Antonio didn't want to travel during the day. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Was it true vampires were weakened by the sun? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And what the hell did the vampires want with me? I don't see why we can't just kill her now, the first one said, sounding a bit petulant. Orders are orders, although we disobeyed them by capturing her so soon. We weren't ready yet but would have to make do. His voice had grown hard. You two almost fucked everything up. You're lucky I was there. It wasn't our fault. We were just trying to have an evening snack. How could we have known that werewolves would be nearby? You were supposed to be watching her. What the hell? Watching me? The other one hissed. Silence. Do not disrespect your elders, especially when I'm the only reason your neck wasn't broken. He sighed irritably. I was watching the club from the front. I didn't expect her to go out that way. I didn't know you two idiots would be munching on a human nearby. Marco huffed and there was a moment of silence. I've never met a werewolf. I didn't think she'd be that strong. You're too young to be a match for a fully grown werewolf. Don't forget that. I heard the noise of a chair being pulled out as the vampire sat down. Can I at least wake her up? She bit Angelo. She deserves some sort of punishment. I wondered if my bite had killed Angelo or just wounded him. Knowing my luck, he was still out and looking for blood. Be my guest. Just don't injure her too badly. Antonio wants her in good condition. I automatically tensed, my breathing coming out faster than I'd intended. I heard footsteps approach me as Marco neared. I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. I braced myself for a hit, knowing I had to conserve my energy in order to have any chance at communication. I fervently hoped the vampires didn't know about my ability to mentally communicate with my foul being in wolf form. Rise and shine, Marco snarled, and I felt a breath of air before the back of his hand collided with the side of my face. My head snapped to the side and my eyes opened instantly, fixating on his face as I bared my teeth in a snarl. In the back of my mind I registered the fact that he looked different from yesterday. More human, for lack of a better word. His fangs were no longer visible and his eyes were not the black pits they had been yesterday. His pupils had shrunk to make his unnaturally bright green irises visible. I glanced down, noting that he had a clean shirt on. I hoped the wounds I inflicted still hurt like hell. My cheek stung from the blow and I felt my wolf's anger that we were being attacked in our helpless state. Gritting my teeth, I positioned myself to face Marco. Good morning, bitch, Marco snapped. I ignored the insult, shifting my gaze to examine the vampire that had drugged me. He had white blonde hair and his eyes were blue, unnaturally bright like Marco's. He had an unamused expression on his features as he watched us. Look at me when I'm talking to you. He drew back his hand and slapped me on the other side of my face. Once again my head jerked to the side. I bit my lip to keep from making any noise. Pain lanced through my face. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. Crawling in irritation, Marco curled his hand into a fist then punched me, part of his fist connecting with the side of my mouth. This time I visibly winced as his punch forced my teeth into my lip. I tasted coppery blood as it filled my mouth. I knew without hearing her that my wolf was howling her fury at this despicable creature. If I could get free I would tear him to shreds. I forced myself to take a deep breath. If I was going to get out of here I needed all of my energy. I fervently hoped my pack would find me. The vampire's nostrils flared. "I can smell your blood. Dog, good thing it smells disgusting and repulsive. Otherwise I'd make you into breakfast." I snorted before I could help myself, knowing it was obviously a bluff. "Der boss. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Needed me for something, so I doubt he'd let Marco make me into breakfast. My reaction seemed to infuriate him, for in a second Marco was in my face. His hand reached out and grabbed my neck. He began to squeeze, his grip crushing. I could feel bruises forming on my throat as he gripped harder. His face contorted into a snarl. I struggled to spite myself, attempting to get air into my lungs. "Release her," the blonde vampire demanded, an edge to his voice. Marco paused, his angry eyes still boring into mine. The other vampire barked, and with a growl of reluctance the vampire released my neck. I sucked in the air gratefully, my neck bruised and tender. "You need to go cool off. Now, before sunrise. Antonio will punish us if she's to bruise. She's his leverage. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I wheezed, trying to catch my breath. Leverage for what? I had a sneaking suspicion, but hoped I was wrong. The two vampires stared each other down for a moment more before Marco stalked over to the door, tossing me an angry look over his shoulder as he went. "I don't see why we have to stay in this place before he gets here," he muttered darkly as he held the door open. "We could just meet him at the mansion. We can't risk leaving the city. As soon as we get away from all the humans, her pack will be able to find her scent and they'll track us down." So did that mean they were looking for me now? I wondered. At least it told me we were still in the city, although I wasn't sure where. If the vampires kept me here to mask my scent, it would make sense if they were closer to downtown where the population density was higher. Marco lifted the door to the facility open. It was dark outside, but the sky was beginning to lighten slightly and I knew sunrise wasn't far away. I tried to inconspicuously observe the surroundings outside. Fortunately, there were a few dim lights outside so I could make out certain details. Directly across from us was another door that looked identical to the one Marco had just opened. From the quick glance I obtained before he shut the door behind him, I tried to memorize all I could. If I was going to try to contact my father or Alpha Brett later, they would need all the clues they could get, unless they found me first, which based on my luck so far was highly unlikely. As soon as the other vampire left, the blonde one relaxed in his chair and pulled out a phone. He began clicking away on the device, ignoring me completely, left alone with my new bruises and burning wrists where the silver touched. I finally allowed my mind to wander to Gabriel. I pictured his flawless skin and dark eyes. Trying to get away from thoughts of him had landed me in this mess in the first place. Maybe that was a sign. I thought over our interaction in the clearly and husky way he had declared me as his. Was I going to die without ever having touched my mate? My situation seemed pretty hopeless at the moment. If I wouldn't have been so pathetic and confused, maybe he would have wanted me. He had been cruel in the past, but my hatred of him had dimmed after meeting these horrid vampires. My mind wandered in circles like this for quite some time. I attempted to distract myself from the dull physical pain with thoughts of Gabriel and my family as the minutes trickled by. Another hour passed in silence, then another, and I lost track of time. I had just begun to contemplate my growing hunger when Marco returned. He created quite a racket, throwing up the storage room door and slamming it as soon as he was inside. Looking out, I realized it was because tendrils of sunlight were beginning to stretch across the sky. Thankfully, Marco ignored me as he pulled out a chair and sat at the table next to the blonde vampire. He had brought a sack of items with him and he pulled out a book from the sack, facing away from me and promptly beginning to read. Another hour passed by and I began to grow increasingly uncomfortable. My stomach had started to rumble and my throat was incredibly dry. But worst of all was my need to use the restroom. I hadn't consumed much liquid the night before, but my discomfort persisted. Surely the vampires wouldn't let me soil myself. I cleared my throat, and icy blue eyes quickly snapped to my face. The blonde vampire stared at me with a blank expression. "I need to use the restroom," I said coldly, my voice raspy from my thirst. "How is that our problem?" Marco sneered, glaring at me over his shoulder. "You're the one that's trapped in here with me. If I just let it go, you'll be the one smelling it all day." The blonde one raised an eyebrow, looking bemused. "Marco, give her that bottle you brought and I one of her hands." "Only one. We don't need her shifting. A bottle." Was he serious? Marco was scowling, but apparently he had no desire to smell my urine, for he approached me, crumbling and clutching an empty Powerade bottle. Meanwhile, my mind was racing. If he untied one of my hands, I would have a bit of my strength back. I had remained motionless the last 3 hours, trying to relax and store my energy as much as possible. Did I have enough to send a message to my dad? It was as good a time as any to try. I wanted to be long gone before Antonio arrived. Marco stooped behind me, and I felt him insert a key into the padlock that held the chains together. He tugged the chains off of my left hand before locking them. I flexed my hand, glad to be rid of the burning sensation for even one moment. I also felt a bit of my strength return, although not much. A large plastic bottle was placed in my lap. "Make it quick, dog. No sudden moves or tricks," Marco snapped before returning to his chair. Part of me felt extremely uncomfortable trying to do this while they were in the room, but I had no choice here. Still, my cheeks burned at the thought of that immodesty. I knew it was petty to care about that at a time like this. To my agent extraordinaire, wildest, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Who knew if I'd even get out of here? I took a deep breath and attempted to ignore my embarrassment. It wasn't as if they were watching me anyways. They had entered a heated conversation about something, and I knew this was my chance. I began to go about my business, attempting to arrange my clothing with one hand so I could relieve myself, which was pretty dang difficult. For the first time in a day, I was actually thankful that I had a skirt on, but my mind was preparing energy instead of focusing on the task at hand. After I finished using the restroom, still feeling immensely awkward, I made a big show about readjusting my clothing. Really, I was preparing to send the message. Fortunately, the vampires were still in a fairly intense discussion and paid me no mind. I knew I had 30 seconds, at most, and probably not even that. I dipped into the reserve of energy I had stored all day, taking a deep breath. It wasn't much, but hope it would work. With all the force I had, I roughly broke through the haze of pain that was causing my mental block and focused on my father. I closed my eyes, narrowing my vision to Justin. I felt my energy quickly draining, and I had to act fast. Vampires have me somewhere near downtown. Warehouse or storage unit. Even these few words left me with my energy nearly gone. I could feel it seeping away as I tried to maintain my concentration. With one last bit of effort, I projected the image of the building I had seen when Marco opened the door. I kept this image in my mind for as long as possible, hoping against hope that my father could see it. Then the last vestiges of my energy left and I drooped. To my agent extraordinaire, wildest, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The image faded from my mind, and I felt my mental barriers return as my concentration vanished. I could only hope it would work. "I still don't understand why we can't just question her," Marco said. He had started pacing about 2 hours after I had sent my mental message. Meanwhile, I was growing increasingly worried. Shouldn't they have found me by now? It had been well over 2 hours. And by my guess I had left the club 13 or 14 hours ago. Where the hell were they? Did my message not go through? That last thought was extremely disheartening. I tried not to give up hope. I had to make it through. The master trusts Antonio with questioning, not those of our rank. I made a mental note that Antonio was not the big boss after all. We could still ask a few questions, just basic ones. We captured her after all. We should get to participate in the fun. He wouldn't like it. He doesn't have to know. Brutus, Marco snapped impatiently. I took another mental note. If I ever got out of here, I wanted to know who these vampires were so I could get my revenge. Brutus sighed, leaning back in his chair. She could take a couple more hits, he said coolly, a slight smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. I've grown bored. I wasn't hired to babysit her she-wolf all day. If it weren't for her relation to Gabriel, we could have killed her already. I jolted upright in my seat at the mention of Gabriel's name, so this had something to do with him. It made sense, given the timing of all of this. What did they want with him? My mental questioning came to a standstill as Marco approached me, strolling with the grace of a predator. I did not like the hateful and angry expression hovering on his features. With a burst of speed, he appeared in front of me and struck me in the face. I gasped slightly, reeling with the force of the blow. All right, I'm bored, so you're going to answer a few questions for me. Where is your mate? I bit my lip, not liking the fact that he was asking about Gabriel and that they knew he was my mate. This solidified my suspicion that they had been watching us in the forest that day. That faint scent I'd caught in the woods must have been that of a vampire following me. It had still been before sunrise. To my agent extraordinaire, wildest, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Regardless, I had no idea where Gabriel was at this second. If the vampire had half of a brain, he'd know that. I remained straight on ily silent, not liking my silence. Marco grabbed my cheek roughly and glared into my eyes. I asked you a question. I just watched him coolly. Like hell they were getting any answers from me. Marco sneered and backhanded me again. I winced from the pain of the blow. Although at this rate I wouldn't even notice my newest bruise. Here's something we need. I'll ask you again, where is he? There was no way to win here, either by staying silent or by telling him the truth, which I would never do. Not that I knew the answer to his question. I felt a surge of frustration, something you need, like a breath mint. I snapped cheekily before I could help myself. My wolf would be proud. Immediately I knew I should have just stayed silent, as the next slap was much harder. The questioning continued for 4 more rounds, and each time I did not answer in any way other than to glare at him or make a snarky comment. Each time I received a slap to the face. One of my cheeks was going numb, although I could taste blood in my mouth from where my teeth had cut into the inside of it. I spit most of it out on the floor, but apparently the vampires really didn't care for werewolf blood because they didn't even glance at it. We need to be more rough with her, Marco snapped. But Brutus was shaking his head. I told you, Engineer wants her undamaged. Marco turned on me again, expression taut. I thought his eyes had darkened somewhat and I was worried his fangs would come out any minute. Tell us where he is. Leaning in close to my face, I spit on him. The globs of saliva, and even a little bit of blood, splattered his face and he roared with rage, punching me directly in my side and cutting my satisfaction short. I cried out in pain that time despite myself as I felt a definite crack. I hunched over, gasping in agony. My side was on fire. Breathing heavily, I winced. It seemed as if he'd broken a rib. Marco roughly grabbed me and shoved me upright. I whimpered in pain, screwing my eyes shut as I anticipated the next blow. I had no way of defending myself. Brutus snapped, sounding angry. Marco snarled in fury again, seemingly ignoring Brutus' protests, but his snarl was drowned out by a mighty roar. My eyes snapped open as the vampires spun towards the source. I heard a loud screeching noise and then a grating sound as the door was pulled up. Sunlight flooded part of the room, causing the vampires to hiss in pain and flee to the back corners of the building. But I didn't care about them. My eyes were fixated on the blinding light. The werewolf stood there. To my agent extraordinaire, wildest, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Will, and my father, all with worried and furious expressions, but my gaze quickly slid to the 4th werewolf, the one who had roared and opened the door. Gabriel, my mate, saving me. I sighed with relief as I heard the vampire snarl in fury behind me, and then all hell broke loose. Chapter 8. A couple hours earlier, Maria's POV. I glared mutinously at my father. Our dark eyes locked in a silent standoff as we mentally argued. You need to stay here. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He was insisting. You've been looking for Skylar all night, and now the others are searching the city. It's your turn to rest. You look exhausted. I don't give a crap if I look tired. I snapped furiously. She's my best friend, Dad. I don't care if I have to search for a week without sleeping. Our pack is taking shifts. Do you not trust your father and will to find her? They've been searching all night without rest. Doubt they aren't taking any breaks. Closing his eyes briefly and running his hand through his dark hair. I knew that my father, as pack beta, was trying to avoid causing a panic while keeping everyone rested and on full alert. For all we knew, an attack on our pack was imminent if one of our own had been kidnapped. My father was right to be cautious, and he was even more so when it came to me. I had been searching all night with no luck. We could find no trace of her scent anywhere. After a while, Alpha Brett commanded that Anne, Jake, and I return with a report and others would take our place searching. Skylar's father. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Had been in the city since we first reported Skylar missing and he refused to return to the pack until she was safe. We had somehow avoided being called back to the village and was still searching alongside Skylar's father. I knew I couldn't rest. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I was physically exhausted from lack of sleep, but my mind was on constant alert. I couldn't help but feel that something bad had happened to my best friend and I couldn't allow that to happen. So here I was, stuck arguing with my father about letting me leave and rejoin the search party. Dad, please. I finally spoke out loud. We were in Alpha Brett's house and there were others conversing nearby, but I didn't care at this point. I won't be able to sleep. And maybe they'll need my help. It's a big city. Well, a big city when you are trying to find one, she-wolf. My father clenched his jaw and looked down. I could tell he was close to caving. I noticed that Alpha Brett had finished his conversation and was coming to stand next to my father. I hoped they wouldn't gang up on me. She'd do it for me. Dad, I aired quietly, knowing it was true. Skylar would not hesitate to look for me until she collapsed with exhaustion. If our situations were reversed. My father glanced at Alpha Brett, and the two appeared to be having a silent conversation. After a moment they turned back to me and my father opened his mouth to speak, but Alpha Brett suddenly froze, holding up a hand. His eyes became unfocused as he paused, listening to something in his head. I shifted from foot to foot, itching to shift into wolf form and return to the search. Her father just contacted me. Skylar sent him a message. It was brief, but she sent him a picture of what she could see. It won't narrow it down much, but it'll help. I'm going to pass it along to all of the searchers, including you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. The Alpha said. I felt a rush of hope. Any hint was helpful at this point, and it sounded like he was going to let me return to town. I closed my eyes as I felt the touch of a mental contact. I opened my mind, receiving the image that Alpha Brett was sending. It was somewhat fuzzy, having been passed through Skylar's father, but it was better than nothing. There wasn't much to see in the mental image, but from what I could gather, it looked like some sort of warehouse. I tried to memorize the layout and color of the surrounding buildings outside of the room Skylar was in. I reopened my eyes, feeling a surge of nervousness. Her location had not seemed pleasant, and I could only hope she was okay. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I know you want to help, so I'm going to authorize your return to the search team. Alpha Brett tossed a look at my father, who hesitated before nodding. We need all the help we can get, Jack. And knowing your daughter, she'll go either way. My father gave a wry smile. I gave him my thanks before turning to leave. I wasn't going to bother changing clothes or eating clothes during the search. My father and the Alpha followed me outside. It was still morning, the sun slowly ascending in the sky, and I could not believe we had searched for so long all night and early morning, without finding her. I felt like a horrible friend. Skylar's scent had still been fresh when we noticed her missing, so it had been within 30 minutes after her departure that we followed her. But I felt terrible nonetheless. I wish I'd have stuck by her side all night, especially knowing what she was going through. We found her shoes, tossed aside in an alleyway. That was where her scent had ended. The smell of human blood had hung thickly in the air, with a decent puddle of it on the ground, and I'd suspected that was what drew Skylar out there, to make sure the human was okay. However, we'd seen no signs of humans anywhere. No bodies, despite how much blood was on the ground. The most curious part had been the blood caked on Skylar's shoe. It wasn't hers, and it wasn't human. I had no idea who it belonged to, and that was a frightening thought. I swallowed hard, trying to rein in my emotion. Skylar must have felt so lost and abandoned, especially since her father hadn't been able to contact her mentally. Surely she would know we weren't giving up. I stopped abruptly when I heard a low snarl come from Alpha Brett behind me. I spun around to see a frighteningly angry expression contorting his features. My father looked confused, glancing around to see what the problem was before looking at Alpha Brett for an explanation. That bastard. Alpha Brett was seething. What? Bewildered. Border Patrol just notified me that Gabriel, he spit out the name, is on our territory, requesting to see me. He's almost here already. How he made it so far before they detected him, I don't know, but they are escorting him here. Apparently he felt excruciating pain coming through his link with Skylar, and he came right away. I felt a strange mix of emotions then. Worry, for Gabriel was a frightening individual and his appearance would surely cause trouble. Horror, because of the excruciating pain, that he felt they hadn't even mated, so the pain must have been intense. Mates could feel each other's every emotion and thought once they completed the process. But before the claiming, only the most intense emotions and physical pain could be shared between them. I also felt a surprising amount of relief. Gabriel was the most powerful wolf I'd ever been around. Surely he could help us find her. If he was coming all this way, that meant he cared about her. Right. I then realized that he'd made the journey all the way from his pack village to the heart of our territory in half of a day. It was normally a day's journey between the two villages, which meant he'd been traveling incredibly fast to get here. That reassured me even further, and I was begrudgingly impressed with his speed. We have less wolf patrolling today because of how many are searching for Skylar. That's probably why they took so long to scent and catch up to him. What are you going to do? My father was asking, his brow furrowed. I don't want him on our territory, Alpha Brett growled, although I'm not sure I can stop him. By law he is allowed to request my presence. You might help us find Skylar, I added, nervous about his reaction. His eyes focused on me. Perhaps, he admitted begrudgingly. Dislike was evident in his expression. I couldn't blame him, but our pack member had to come first. We can't exactly attack him. To my agent extraordinaire, Mylan Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm, my father said bitterly, not without risk of his pack's reaction. As horrible as the truth was, the Black Mountains pack was a lot stronger than us. We couldn't afford to anger them. The two began to converse about Gabriel, swiftly walking in the direction that I assumed the Alpha would be coming from. I followed without permission. I may not like the wolf, based on what he and his father had done to our pack over the years, but he was Skylar's mate and we needed help. If she was in pain, her wolf would need his presence, and we had to put her before pack relations right now. To my surprise, the Alpha and my father let me follow with only a brief stern glance in my direction from the latter. They had more important things to worry about right now, and I sure as hell wasn't staying behind when I could be helping my best friend somehow. Apparently I'd be getting the chance to meet my best friend's mate up close and personal. I only hoped that he could prove himself worthy of having a mate like Skylar, and help us save her. Before it was too late, we stopped in a clearing some distance away and secluded from our pack village. We didn't have to wait long before the unfamiliar scent grew strong. I felt a small flutter of nervousness in the pit of my stomach. The alpha of the Black Mountains peck unnerved me. I couldn't even imagine how Skylar must have felt when she discovered that he was her mate. Perhaps there was some good in him? Deep down, if fate chose him for Skylar, he couldn't be all bad, could he? He emerged from the trees nearby, flanked by the 2 wolves on border patrol. I snorted mentally he'd wolf both of them, and I knew there was absolutely no chance they'd be able to take him in a fight. The alpha was massive and muscular, a few inches taller even than Alpha Brett, with incredibly dark hair and eyes. I had to admit, for such a cruel asshole, he definitely was good looking. If it weren't for the predatory gleam in his eyes and the animalistic way he moved, he would look more beautiful than dangerous. I, of course, did not feel the type of attraction to him that my best friend did. As my wolf had absolutely no interest in him, I knew it must have been hell for Skylar. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Whenever she was near him, I quickly averted my eyes as his dark gaze briefly connected with mine. Geez, I was ogling the guy's good looks and I wasn't even attracted to him. How the hell did Skylar resist him? I felt a pang of sympathy for what she must go through every time she was around him. I knew that one day, I'd feel the exact same irresistible physical pull towards my own mate. Where is she? He spoke abruptly before anyone could address him. I detected an edge of worry in his tone and it was surprising, considering the emotionals' way he spoke at the meeting I had gone to. Alpha Brett replied shortly. I was surprised he wasn't reprimanded Gabriel for infringing upon our territory then again. A kidnapped wolf took precedence. I cautiously looked up to see Gabriel's reaction. How can you not know? He demanded, voice harsh. His hands were curled into fists. The 2 wolves on either side of him looked nervous. We have a group of wolves looking for her as we speak. I could tell Alpha Brett was trying to control his anger. Skylar disappeared outside of a club in the human settlement nearby over 12 hours ago. She recently contacted her father with a brief message, claiming she was kidnapped by vampires and is being held captive. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. My gaze snapping to his face. Vampires. Alpha Brett had not said anything about that before. Why did he not look surprised that Skylar was talking about vampires? I thought they were a myth. Then again, humans probably thought we were a myth. Gabriel's eyes had a deadly gleam in them. You haven't found her? I felt both wolves stiffen next to me at the implied reprimand. Then I will go to the settlement. Where is it? He did not seem surprised by the whole vampire idea. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Just angry. His expression was unnerving. Alpha Brett turned to me then, irritation evident in his stance, and I caught my breath. I thought I saw where this was going. Maria was with Skylar last. We've been searching for her, but her scent is nowhere to be found. We will send Maria and 2 other wolves to escort you to the city. It was clear he wanted Gabriel gone as soon as possible. Gabriel's imposing black eyes were on me again, and I shifted my weight uncomfortably. I could already tell that my father did not like the idea of me going along with Gabriel, but he dare not contradict Alpha Brett in front of another alpha. Then we are wasting time. Let's go, he said coolly, but once again I detected a worried undertone to his words. I could only hope that he could help us find her, because I couldn't shake the notion that her time was running out. Half of an hour later, we were sprinting in wolf form through the woods towards the city. 2 other wolves from my pack, Seth and Carrie, had joined us as we raced to the city to meet Skylar's father, Will, and the rest of the search party. I could sense both of their unease and dislike for the gigantic black wolf running alongside us, but they hadn't complained. If someone in our pack was in danger, we got them before everything else. Glancing at Gabriel nervously out of the corner of my eye, My wolf couldn't help but be slightly awed, which was likely due to the alpha presence that we still recognized despite being in a different pack. Brett had a similar effect on my wolf, but he wasn't as imposing as the alpha next to me. Skylar's mate had the largest wolf form I had ever seen, and it was pitch black in color. I could tell he was slowing his run slightly to accommodate us, and it was paining him to do so. But he needed our mental picture of Skylar's location to find her, so he kept to our non-alpha pace. I could see the tension in every line of his form. It must be even worse now that his wolf was running free. A wolf would always put their mate above everything. At our fast pace, it did not take too long to reach the fringe of the trees. Here we had to shift back into human form while our mission was important. We couldn't risk exposure of our species for any reason. The four of us each found a tree to shift behind, which would not have been necessary without Gabriel's presence. Normally I tied my clothes to my ankle, but this time I had carried a pack of clothes on my back, since shoes were required when venturing in the human settlement. I quickly changed, shoving the shoes on my feet hastily before emerging. My sense of urgency increased tenfold now that we were in the outskirts of the city and I could see its sheer size. How were we supposed to find her amidst all of the humans' overpowering smell? A few minutes later, we spotted Skylar's dad, Will, and two other wolves awaiting us outside of some random coffee shop. As we approached, I saw all four of them stiffen when they saw Gabriel. Although Alpha Brett had warned them in advance, Will and the two wolves shifted uneasily, trying to conceal their reactions to Gabriel's imposing presence. Alexander especially had an ease in his expression as he eyed his daughter's mate. I couldn't blame him. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Alexander greeted him curtly, as using his name would be far too informal. Gabriel nodded, his eyes holding an unfathomable expression as he examined his mate's father with renewed interest. I could tell he was sizing Skylar's father up, measuring him. The tension between my pack and Gabriel crackled in the air. Will's expression was darker than normal, clear dislike in his gaze. Gabriel turned his head slightly as if noticing Will's stare, and would immediately look down. He didn't have the gall to look the alpha straight in the eyes. Hell, neither did I. Gabriel stared at Will a moment longer, eyes slightly narrowed. I furrowed my brow in confusion. Was it just me? Or did Gabriel seem even more tense now? Had Will's expression irritated him that much? Do you have a plan? Gabriel finally asked, turning away from Will and breaking the taut silence. Alexander nodded, and Will seemed relieved that Gabriel was no longer staring at him. We were going to split up into two groups again. Me, you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. And we were going to take the south side of downtown. The message Skylar sent me said she was somewhere near downtown and it looked like she was in a warehouse of some sort. We've been combing the streets down there, but it's a huge area. The others can take the north side, part of which we've already searched. Alexander was holding out a map at this point and outlining the general area. It really was quite large. I only wish she'd been able to contact us sooner, for we'd wasted several hours checking the territory around the city and the outskirts of the city itself, thinking her kidnappers would not want to stay put. However, this many humans served to mask us out completely. It really was a clever tactic. Alexander indicated two cars parked on the curb. We were using these earlier, but the traffic is pretty bad downtown. It's actually faster to walk. He reached out his coat pocket and pulled out one last piece of paper. When she contacted me earlier, I had were storage units, empty buildings, and warehouses in the city. I glanced down at the paper. It had started out with dozens of names, but over half had been crossed out. We ruled out those not near downtown and a few that we've driven by. That still leaves several in the general area. Their addresses are marked, so that's where we are going. Alexander glanced around the entire group, his eyes finally resting on Gabriel. Any questions? Nobody indicated that they had a question, so the group split and the four of us headed south at a brisk walk. My wolf wanted me to utilize werewolf speed, and I cursed the fact that there were so many humans around. milling about in the streets, smelling of everything from cheap cologne, sweat, gasoline, to various types of food. I wrinkled my nose in distaste. Wolf fell into step beside me as we walked towards downtown. I felt the small prickle of happiness that always made itself known when he was near me. Wolf wasn't my true mate, but I had developed feelings for him the past couple of years. I had never told him, worried about rejection, and I wasn't sure he had gotten over Skylar, as he'd had a crush on her a few years ago. He'd even been her first and only, as far as I knew, kiss. Skylar had moved on when she didn't feel the sparks, but I wasn't sure where we stood. "It's okay. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." Snapping me out of it, I tried to focus on the task ahead, shaking my thoughts out of my daydreaming. "Not really," I replied tiredly. "I can't help but blame myself. You know, I could tell that Gabriel was listening to our conversation from his rigid posture as he walked a few steps in front of us. I would have to be careful what I said. It's not just your fault. None of us noticed she'd gone." Bitterness in his tone. "We should have gone out to eat instead. She's not that into clubbing." Dejected. "You were just trying to cheer her up," we replied, trailing off. We both knew that the cause of her agitation was just a few feet from us. Gabriel's posture had grown even more rigid, if that were possible. Still, she wandered off alone and we weren't even paying attention. She seemed okay the last time I saw her. She was sitting in a booth across from that random guy, and there was a drink in front of her. I tossed Will a warning glance after he said that, not wanting Gabriel to get the wrong idea. One of his hands had curled into a fist as he walked in front of us, causing the rigid muscles to stand out along his arm. It was a very threatening stance. I knew male wolves could get jealous very easily, and he was an alpha. No less. "Yeah, I saw that too, but she wasn't even paying attention to him," I quickly added, fibbing a little for Gabriel's benefit. "We got the hint." "Yeah, she's never been interested in that sort of thing," he mumbled. I thought I detected a trace of sadness in his voice, but I shot him a grateful smile as Gabriel seemingly relaxed in front of us. "Still, I think this one's on me." I knew she'd get bored on the dance floor quickly. I should have gone to sit with her. If anything, it's all of us. We all know Skylar has a tendency to wander off. Will grinned as he spoke, and I knew he was talking about that time at the beginning of high school when Skylar got completely lost in the human mall. I missed those carefree days. Conversation ceased at that point as we approached the first addressed address on the sheet. I noticed Alexander holding a small GPS. He must have bought it in town. We did a cursory scan of the warehouse, taking a few minutes to me and around the building surrounding it. But Skylar's father was shaking his head and I agreed. It didn't look right. We continued our expedition, growing increasingly frustrated as we searched. The next addresses weren't the right location. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I tried to keep the picture in my head, memorizing every detail of the doors, street altered, and even the brick on the side of the building. I threw a glance at Gabriel. He must be extremely frustrated, as he didn't even have a mental picture to go by. I felt the tension quickly escalating as the minutes trickled by. We must have been searching for over an hour and still no luck. Damn it. We burst out as the next location was a bust. As well. Time is running out. We don't even know if it's one of these addresses. "It has to be," Alexander replied tautly. "We have to trust Skylar's message. She has to be downtown somewhere." Well, what if her kidnappers forced her to send that message to intentionally mislead us? She could be long gone. I don't think so. To me, she sounded like she couldn't send a longer message because she didn't have the energy. Something is blocking her mentally. His green eyes focused on Gabriel. "You said you felt her pain. Did you get anything else?" Alexander's expression was contorted. I knew he didn't want to hear about his daughter's pain. Not enough. The mating bond isn't strong enough. I felt the tension increase as Gabriel said that. I only felt it because it was so strong. I think it came from her neck. A vampire must have bitten her. He tried to keep his voice controlled, but I sensed the strain. Will turned to me, mouthing vampires as a question. Not knowing the answer, Alexander had uttered a swear word, rubbing his temples with his hands. Apparently everyone knew about vampires except us, and getting bitten by one was not a good thing judging by Skylar's father's reaction. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Milben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Is it going to kill her? Will asked, voice shaking slightly. A vampire bite won't kill, Gabriel said shortly. I wondered how he knew. They could have killed her after they bit her. Will said darkly. I gave him a look, wanting him to shut up. I didn't like to think about Skylar being. I couldn't think about it. Alexander was shaking his head, but Gabriel spoke first. She isn't. I would know if she died. Will eyed him suspiciously. You haven't mated. You can't be sure. It must have been the exhaustion and worry that was making him speak to an elf like that. Will wasn't normally so forward, and I knew he found Gabriel intimidating. Don't question me, Pup, Gabriel replied coldly, a hard edge of anger in his voice as his eyes flashed. Will looked away, gritting his teeth in fury, a condescending tone. But he had the intelligence to shut up. He was no match for the alpha, and he knew it. We're here. Alexander cut it to prevent further confrontation. From his facial expression I could tell the conversation had gotten to him. He quickly turned onto a small, narrow street between two tall buildings. We followed, Gabriel striding ahead of Will and I. We followed the narrow street for a block or two before making an abrupt right. The streets here were only one way, and the tall buildings looming next to us created an ominous atmosphere. We passed few people as we continued our convoluted trail through the city streets, taking several more turns before Alexander came to an abrupt halt. Gabriel stopped beside him, nostrils flaring. I felt a flicker of recognition as my eyes fell upon the cluster of small warehouses stretched out in front of us. There were a few small streetlighted above. The doors were the same color and style of those in Skylar's message, and the brick was the same mottled, faded pattern. With renewed urgency we approached the first warehouse. Alexander indicated for us to be completely silent. Not that we weren't anyway. He put his ear against the metal garage door, then shook his head as he took a whiff of the air. The buildings were small, and we passed two more before we heard a loud roar coming from the warehouse across from us. The roar was quickly followed by a yelp of pain that all of us recognized at once. Skylar. I breathed. My quiet exclamation was drowned out as Gabriel lunged towards the door. A furious sound ripping from his throat, no doubt caused by Skylar's pain. The sound drowned out any noise coming from inside as Gabriel grabbed the bottom of the door, yanking it upwards roughly. I winced as the metal grating fell upon my sensitive ears, but there was no to waste as the four of us gathered at the entrance. Time seemed to stand still for a few seconds as we took in the room's contents. The first person I saw was Skylar. She was hunched over in a chair in the center of the room, blinking into the bright light. I could tell her hands were bound behind her by her awkward posture. I gasped sharply as I took in her bruised and battered face, the way she winced as she moved. An instant later my eye slid to the other two creatures in the room, who were huddling back against the far wall of the room, trying to get away from the sunlight. Vampires. They could be nothing else with their pale faces and protruding fangs. They looked like living corpses with black, soulless eyes. Out of the corner of my eye saw Gabriel's eyes fixate on Skylar's for a split second before his face contorted with rage. He let out a furious snarl and leapt into the room. I wanted to do the same and tear those vampires apart for hurting my best friend, but Alexander grabbed my arm in a tight grip. Contact the other said party. Quick. Tell them to bring the car outside 186th Street. They should be nearby. They were searching the other half of town. He hissed in my ear, passing me what looked like a Go phone. He must have purchased it knowing we couldn't shift to wolf form in the middle of the city to mind, link the other searchers. I took it numbly, trying to resist my impulse to rip the vampire's limb from limb. Alexander then hurried over to Skylar, kneeling in front of her, while Will glanced at me then leapt towards the vampires. I hoped the other search party in the human city was not too far away. I could have mind-linked them in wolf form, but obviously I could not do that here. I quickly dialed the number and put the device to my ear, standing there transfixed with the phone clutched in my hand as the scene unfolded. The room seemed to explode with sounds of hisses and screeches. A battle erupted between the two werewolves and the two vampires. There was barely enough space to accommodate all of them. I could not tear my eyes away from the scene as one of the other werewolves searching for Skyle across town answered the phone, and I quickly gave him the address before hanging up. Judging by Skylar's state, she would not be able to walk, and the car was necessary to avoid attracting the attention of the humans while dragging an unconscious girl around town. An instant before Gabriel leapt on a dark hair vampire, I knew what was coming. The vampire tried to swing at him, but the alpha was far too fast, grabbing the vampire and roughly throw him against the wall. The force of the collision almost seemed to shake the building. I dimly registered Will's struggle with the other vampire, but could not look away from the beat down that was occurring. Gabriel had pinned the vampire in a blow of motion and was punching the monster repeatedly in the face. Each blow caused the vampire to howl in pain, and I swore I heard something crack. The alpha was merciless, murder in his expression, and I was surprised he hadn't lost control and shifted into his wolf form despite the danger. Perhaps he wanted to witness the vampire's suffering as a human. Or perhaps he was just remarkably good at keeping his wits about him. I couldn't help but feel somewhat satisfied that these monsters that had abused Skylar were getting what they deserved. The vampire's face was completely bloodied now. Gabriel picked the creature up by his neck, a snarl on his face. "Don't kill the other yet," he ordered Will, who had managed to pin the other vampire against the wall near the corner of the building. Although the blonde vampire he had pinned was putting up quite a struggle. Will nodded, sweat beading on his brow. Alexander was still crouched in front of his daughter, shielding her from most of the battle and speaking softly to her. Gabriel was crushing the vampire's throat. He kicked and struggled weakly, clawing at the alpha's hand, but to no avail. With a swift jerk, Gabriel slammed the vampire's head into the wall. Once, twice, 3 times. Then he released the vampire and it slid to the ground, not moving. There was a dark stain on the wall and I gulped. Gabriel's dark eyes focused on Skyle hesitantly as he crouched over the vampire, as if to make sure she wasn't watching him. Her father was curtly saying something quietly to her and tugging at whatever bound her to the chair. Gabriel looked relieved that she wasn't looking, and a second later, I figured out why, as with one large twist and a disgusting crack, Gabriel broke the vampire's neck. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm," he commanded, looking at me, and I just had time to dodge out of the way before the vampire's body came hurtling past. It crumpled onto the ground in a heap and the skin began to sizzle where the sunlight touched. The scent of burning flesh permeated the air and I tried not to gag. It was revolting. It took mere seconds for the body to catch on fire, then a few seconds more before it disintegrated into ashes completely, leaving a pile of clothes. The sight was disturbing and disconcerting, something I would not soon forget. But I also felt a strong sense of satisfaction that the creature got what it deserved. Nor would I forget the vicious and ferocious way that Gabriel had torn that vampire apart in defense of my best friend. As Gabriel made his way over to where, or was trying to keep the other vampire pinned, I realized that my father and the elf needed a status update. They were a couple hours away, so it would require a bit of concentration, and I quickly turned away from the scene before me, summoning the strength and focusing intently on my father before sending a very quick mental message to him. I was too tired to send anything elaborate. Then, taking a deep breath, I entered the storage room. Skylar looked half asleep in her chair, her head drooping. Her father was trying to keep her relaxed and was visually examining her binds. Although he was not touching them, upon closer inspection I saw that they were silver chains and she had burn marks on her wrists. I growled furiously, knowing that silver caused a werewolf considerable pain, prevented them from shifting, and drained them entirely. "There's a padlock," her father said, voice tense. "Maria, will you look for the key? Search the clothes outside too." I nodded and did as asked. rummaging through the sack of items on the table while keeping an eye on Gabriel and Will. "Who sent you?" Gabriel was snarling. He was now pinning the vampire while Will stood nearby. The vampire had no chance to struggle against Gabriel's imposing strength. The vampire attempted to sneer. "Like I'm going to tell you." Gabriel swiftly punched him in the gut and the creature howled in pain. "Don't make me ask again." The alpha growled warningly. "You might as well kill me. I'll die either way. And your stupid little mate will too if you don't give the master what he wants." The vampire responded. A furious sound emanated from Gabriel's chest, and he bashed the vampire's head back against the wall. "You don't deserve my mercy. Not for touching what's mine." Repeating the action, I glanced at Skylar as I finished my search and walked outside to examine the pile of clothes. So he was possessive of her. "To my agent extraordinaire, Marine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." That was a good sign. "To my agent extraordinaire, Marine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." The fact that he'd come all the way out here for her was obviously a good sign too, and I felt myself dislike him a little bit less. After a bit of rummaging, my hand enclosed on a small brass object and I pulled it out of the pocket with relief. I hurried back inside the room and handed it to Skylar's father. "Bring me a piece of the clothing," Tuar's father instructed. "The padlock is silver and I don't want to touch it with my bare hands if I can avoid it." I did as he asked. I did not watch as Gabriel hit the vampire a few more times before swiftly breaking its neck like he did the others. But again I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction when I heard the deafening crack. Skylar was no longer conscious and I wondered how much of Gabriel's violent actions she had seen. His treatment of the vampires may have been disturbing, but they totally deserved it. And any wolf would have acted the same in the defense of their mate. Hell, I wished I could have gotten a few punches in. Although I knew I couldn't have caused the creature half as much pain as Gabriel did. My strength paled in comparison. Gabriel threw the other body outside to burn in the sun before striding over to us. I watched him carefully, wanting to see how he behaved as he examined my best friend, and saw a look of worry and concern flit across his face, which starkly contrasted with his usual dark expression. Skylar's father, using one of the vampire's shirts to avoid touching the padlock directly, twisted the key and then yanked the padlock off of the chains and let them slide to the floor without touching them. Alexander then stood up and pulled his daughter into his arms. Despite the fact that she was unconscious, I saw her wince and heard her quiet whimper of pain as her body was moved unnoticed. Gabriel stiffened considerably. "I'm going to have to work on her when we get back to the pack. I used some of my affinity to dull her pain and make her drowsy. She has a broken rib. I healed it somewhat so we can move her. I can heal it completely once we're back home. Hopefully she'll sleep the whole way there. We can take the cars and lay her in the back seat," her father said quietly. He looked drained from the energy he had expended. "Yes, they're on their way." Gabriel was standing there, clearly agitated. Staring at Skylar's prone body, he slowly held out his arms, then raised his gaze to meet her father's. "I need to hold her. My wolf," he began, keeping his eyes on Alexander. I noticed Skylar's father's reluctance as he hesitated. No doubt he didn't want the enemy alpha holding his precious daughter. And part of me agreed with him, but I also knew that partially because of Gabriel's help. She was alive right now, and in a time like this, Gabriel's wolf wouldn't want anyone else touching her. And Skylar needed the touch of her mate, even if they hadn't bonded. Alexander knew this better than anyone. It was completely silent for several seconds. Will and I shared a significant look. Gabriel's jaw had clenched and his eyes had darkened. I knew it was nearly killing him to have to ask Skylar's father for permission to hold her, and it was painful for Alexander to let go of her. After a few more tension-filled seconds, Alexander hesitantly nodded and passed her into Gabriel's arms. He had to know it was the best thing for her right now, and it was better to avoid angering Gabriel's wolf. The second they touched, Gabriel's eyes darkened even further and a surprisingly tender expression crossed his face. It was so strangely personal that I felt was intruding in their moment, and I was forced to look away. wanting it to be as private as possible despite the presence of the rest of us here. Skylar instinctively curled her body to be closer to his, although she was asleep at this point. I thought I saw a jealous glint in Will's eyes before he looked away, then the farewell. If you included the unconscious Skylar of us made our way to the main street, Gabriel glancing down at Skylar every few seconds, almost as if he couldn't believe she was there. Soon enough the others had brought the 2 cars and Gabriel was sliding into the back seat with Skylar, ignoring the looks of the others. Some of us would have to run back to the pack house, but I refused. Sliding into the passenger seat, I had to make sure she was okay. Alexander got in the driver's seat and looked back at Gabriel. Half of Skylar's body was on the seat and Gabriel was supporting the rest on his lap. Skylar was still curled into him, sound asleep. The Alpha was staring down the car as if they were the only 2 in the car. Once again I was forced to look away, feeling like an intruder in their private moment, even though she was asleep. So you're coming back with us. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Until she's better, Alexander asked cautiously. I'm not leaving her again, was the curt reply. You Alexander began, but Gabriel cut him off. I won't leave her. As soon as she's better, she's going to come live with me.